I'd like to welcome you all, and I'm thrilled this evening to be opening Restrained, highlighting the figurative clay sculptures of Louise Pentz. Louise has been a clay artist in Nova Scotia for close to 35 years? More than 30? Close to 35?
Started young.
Yes, exactly. Child prodigy. She graduated from NASCAD in an undefinable year. She studied elsewhere in Canada, in Saskatchewan and British Columbia, as well as in Mexico and Arizona. And she's traveled throughout Europe and Japan studying ceramics, particularly clay vessels as funerary urns, and has worked with raku and smoke-fired pottery techniques, which you'll recognize here. Now, while Louise has made a living primarily as a production potter, Pentz Pottery in La Haye you might be familiar with, she's always created one-of-a-kind pieces, and in her own exploration of clay vessels, most recently her vessels have evolved into more sculptural human forms, and particularly females. The roles of women in societies around the world are portrayed in some of these ladies. So in Louise's words, clay, like us, is fragile, vulnerable, and temporary. Also like us, it's strong, purposeful, and can leave a lasting legacy. And that's all I'm going to say in introducing the exhibition, only because Louise knows far more and will give you a lot more insight into tonight's exhibition. Her work can be found in private and public collections throughout Canada, the United States, and France. And we're delighted to have Louise here this evening. She's going to do a special presentation and sort of final installation of her work here this evening. So thank you, Louise.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much. Thank you, every one of you, for coming. I really appreciate it's a cold, threatening night that you'll be surrounded by warm friends and family, and I know this is you're in my corner, so I appreciate that. I had liked, first of all, to thank the Mary Black Gallery. I feel so awkward talking to people over bifocal, so I apologize for that. To thank the Mary Black for the opportunity to exhibit the work. This work has been on my heart for a few years now, and to have this opportunity to show in this lovely space, I'm so grateful. I would like to thank Susan Charles especially, the director, and Craig for all his hard work, and the other staff who assisted in so many ways. I'd like to thank my curators, Dr. Sandra Appleby and Shannon Parker, for just embracing the show immediately and being, such a support to me. I'd like to thank fellow artists who collaborated with me to create some of these pieces. Solomon Ahmed, who has done the wood turning, Brad Hall, who has done the swords at the back, Tim Freeman, who has helped me with as much metal work, and I so appreciate his support and help, Valerie Herder, and John Greer. And to the numerous people who offered me sage advice and support during the creation process. And perhaps my most heartfelt thanks goes to my husband and soulmate for his continuing assistance and encouragement with this project. It's been a long process, and I don't think I could have done it without it. In order to talk about this show, I think I need to tell you something about the background of where it came from. In 2006, I attended the Stephen Lewis Foundation's Grandmothers to Grandmothers Conference in Toronto. Nearly 100 African grandmothers who had lost their children to AIDS and were the sole caregivers to their grandchildren gathered with 200 Canadian women to share their stories. I was struck by how physically ordinary these African women appeared from the outside, and yet how heroic were their lives. Their main concern in coming to Canada was that they might be seen as victims. They were adamant that they were not victims. They clearly stated that no one should tell them how to fix their lives. They knew how to make their own lives better for themselves and for their charges. They simply lacked the resources to do so. Their dignity and strength became the qualities that I've sought to capture in these figures. Let me share just a few of their stories. Many of these women carried the AIDS virus themselves because they cared for their dying children. without the knowledge of how the disease was spread, or without the means to buy protective gloves. These same women who have no resources care for as many as 30 orphaned grandchildren. Some women had buried 6 and 7 of their own children. And although they were sick and grieving themselves, they continued to care for their traumatized grandchildren. One woman told us that in her country, the constitution of that country states that the government will help support senior people. But, she explained, we are not people. We are women. In Darfur, where the state of crisis has continued for over a decade with no end in sight, it's the women who will go outside the refugee camps to gather firewood. If the men go, they will be killed by the militant rebels who surround the camps. If the women go, they are gang raped. When a woman returns, she prepares their meager food rations for her children and husband first. She eats what is left. She cannot tell her husband that she's been raped because he will divorce her for having been with another man. And she will never be allowed to be with her children again. I am in awe of these women. Following the Grandmothers Conference, I began to notice the many media reports, documentaries, books, and films dealing with the violence and injustice which women all over the world are experiencing. Thanks largely to female journalists and writers, women's stories are being told. Being shocked and saddened didn't seem to be an adequate response to the stories of these women's lives made unbearable by circumstances outside their own control. These ongoing restraints on women and girls have brought me to the point where I must give expression to these injustices and not continue to condone them with my silence. The role of an artist is to distill and express the human experience from their particular time and place. This sculpture has become my protest and my prayer for change. Restraint is about security and power. When we restrain ourselves, that's usually a positive thing. When others restrain us, we either struggle to break free or learn to adapt in order to survive. Using symbols of restraint, cords, chains, barriers, my work expresses the capacity of women to both fight and adapt to the limitations which their cultures and circumstances dictate. These figures of clay represent the enduring strength and fragile vulnerability of women. Within the confines of sexual discrimination, a degraded self-image, and marginalized resources, women function. They work, they nurture others, and they keep the foundations of society together. The focus of these sculptures is to reveal the strength of spirit which directs these narratives of experience. It is especially their forms which have been marked, scarred, and smoked that suggest lives lived unsparingly. The placing of clay in fire to be hardened and marked is as old as humanity. This process is a suitable metaphor for the long struggle for sexual equality. I've discovered, since my attention has turned to the figurative work, that there is something that draws us to art which includes the human form. I believe that in some part of our psyche, we're looking for aspects of ourselves in art. Many of these figures are nearly life-size, so our engagement with them is almost as with equals. I have tried to express in each sculpture that none of these self-possessed figures see themselves as victims. They contain inner strength and determination to push back against their restrictive circumstances. Things we carry. That's this piece here with the hands. Things we carry is about the stories carried in a woman's body. Others have taken from her body to meet their own needs. and their shadowy imprints still linger long after they have left. There are hands of at least 4 other people who have used her for their own needs. The hand of violence is at her throat. The baby's hand on her breast. The hand that uses her for sex, either lovingly or without consent. And what I call the mummy pick-me-up hands. That thigh is covered with children's drawings, memories that never leave. Beside each figure in the gallery, I've placed a simple statement that expresses some aspect of the gender struggle, which is being protested. There are 3 pieces which I hope each person will consider before leaving the show. And there is 1 piece which will be completed tonight. This piece is called Collateral Damage. It's this piece. And it refers to women and girls being used up and disposed of just because they're women. The list on the wall reads like an epitaph of the circumstances where others choose to inflict their will on women and girls, causing their deaths. I decided to complete the piece with you present. Yes, can I get everybody to take about 2 to 3 steps back further? I wanted to include you in that facet of this piece because it clearly illustrates that just like these figures, women and girls are being used and disposed of daily while we stand silently by and watch. Is that okay? I mentioned earlier that there are 3 pieces which I hope people will thoughtfully consider before leaving the show. First is No More, and this is this piece in the center. She is the centerpiece of the show. She represents the place that we all need to reach, where violence and discrimination toward women is no longer acceptable. Freedom Begins is the piece, as you first heard it come into the door there, has the key over the heart. Freedom Begins expresses that within each of us lies the courage to change and fight back against what's wrong with our world. Rise up, that's the small bronze piece right beside it. And it is a plea for help from those who have been silenced. In conclusion, history has shown that when women are empowered with education, justice, and access to resources, there is a reduction of poverty, disease, and war in those countries. If I wish for anything to emerge from this exhibition, it would be that those of us who have the right to freedom of speech will be stirred to do what we can to bring justice to those in the world who have no voice. Thank you.